I stood there in my best dress, the one I'd bought on sale 3 months ago, watching my nephew wipe his hands on his pants after he'd thrown my graduation cake directly onto the marble floor of the country club. The cake, the one my mother had ordered, the one that was supposed to celebrate my master's degree, shattered into pieces. Buttercream and sponge cake splattered across that pristine floor like a Jackson Pollock painting nobody wanted to see, and he smiled. He actually smiled. Then he said it loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Eat it off the ground." The room froze for exactly 2 seconds. Then the laughter started. My family's laughter. The same laughter I'd heard my entire life whenever something embarrassing happened, whenever someone needed to be cut down, whenever the family needed someone to feel small. I didn't say a word. I simply smiled, that tight, practiced smile I'd perfected over 58 years, set down my napkin, and excused myself to the bathroom. I locked the door, sat on the edge of the marble counter, and made a decision that would change everything. Hello. My name is Margaret Foster, but everyone has always called me Maggie. I'm about to tell you a story about family betrayal, and the moment I finally learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Not with anger, not with tears, but with a pen, a phone, and the sudden clarity that comes when you realize you've been setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. This is a story about revenge. But not the kind you might expect. It's about the kind that doesn't destroy the revenger, it liberates them. If you've ever felt trapped by family obligation, if you've ever given until it hurt, if you've ever wondered what it feels like to finally say, "Enough," this story is for you. Before I begin, I want you to know what you're about to hear is the truth. Every detail, every text, every moment of rage and every moment of peace that followed. And if this resonates with you, please, know that you're not alone. Many of us have been exactly where I was. Many of us have stood at that same crossroads. Now let me tell you what really happened. My house on Elmwood Drive had always been my sanctuary, a modest Victorian with white shutters and a wraparound porch and a garden I tended religiously. Inside, everything was organized, everything had its place. Books alphabetized by author, kitchen knives sharpened monthly, the bills paid on time, always. The photographs on my mantel told the story of a life spent in service. There was Michael at his college graduation, beaming in his cap and gown. I'd worked an extra job that summer to help pay for his books. There was James and me on our wedding day, 33 years ago, both of us impossibly young and hopeful. And there, in the center, was a photo of my mother, Dorothy, taken at her 70th birthday party. She was wearing pearls and that same expression she wore in most pictures, a half-smile that suggested she was thinking of something else, somewhere else, with someone else. That photograph was the only one of my family on my mantel. Not because I didn't love them, but because I'd learned, somewhere around age 35, that photographs of people who hurt you should probably not be the first thing you see in the morning. I was a high school principal. For 23 years, I'd managed budgets, mediated conflicts between teachers, counseled troubled students, and built a school culture that was known throughout the district for being inclusive and fair. I could navigate the politics of a school board meeting. I could deliver bad news with compassion. I could see potential in students that others had written off. But with my own family, I was powerless. The financial entanglement had started innocuously enough. When I was 32, my father had a stroke. He recovered mostly, but the medical bills were catastrophic. My mother asked me to co-sign a hospital payment plan. I did. At 34, my sister Patricia needed help with a down payment on her first house. I co-signed the mortgage because my parents asked. At 36, my nephew needed college tuition assistance. I co-signed student loans. At 40, my mother wanted to renovate the family home. Could I co-sign a home equity line of credit? Each time, I told myself, this is what family does. This is love. Each time, I told myself, you're in a stable position, you have a good job, you can absorb the risk. Each time, I didn't calculate what I was really paying, not just money, but autonomy. Not just loans, but leverage. By the time I realized what had happened, I was financially enmeshed with my family in ways that made it nearly impossible to set boundaries. If I refused something, they would remind me of all the times I'd said yes. If I tried to assert myself, someone would invoke the loans, either explicitly or implicitly, the subtext hanging in the air like smoke. After all we've done for you, my mother would say, meaning, after all you've done for us, family takes care of family? My sister would say, meaning you have an obligation you can't escape. By the time I was 58, I had signed 4 separate loans, guaranteed a mortgage, and established myself as the family's financial safety net. I made good money, over $110,000 a year. But I lived like I made half that. My salary quietly siphoned off into loans I'd guaranteed for people who seemed to resent me for my financial stability. I'd never thought of it as resentment before, but I would come to understand that this was exactly what it was. Tici graduation celebratium. The graduation party was supposed to be a celebration. I'd earned my master's degree in educational leadership while working full-time as a principal. It took me 6 years of night classes, summers on campus, and more coffee than any human should probably consume. My colleagues threw me a small party at school. My best friend Susan took me to dinner. But my family, my mother had insisted on hosting a formal celebration at the country club. "We want everyone to know how proud we are," my mother had said on the phone. I should have heard what she wasn't saying. "We want to be seen celebrating you." The party was scheduled for Saturday evening at the Ashford Country Club, a place my family had belonged to for 20 years and I'd always found vaguely uncomfortable. Too much money, too much pretense. Too many people discussing their vacation homes and their children's test scores. I bought a new dress, navy blue with small pearl buttons. I got my hair done. I wore the pearl earrings my father had given me 40 years ago, before the stroke, before everything became complicated. My mother had ordered a 3-tier cake from the country club's pastry chef. Vanilla with raspberry filling, white buttercream frosting, gold leaf accents. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was the kind of cake that announced, "This is important. This person is important." 73 people were invited, 68 sure up. We were seated at a large round table in the private dining room. My mother sat at the head as she always did. My sister Patricia sat to her left. My nephew David, Patricia's only child, age 24, currently unemployed and living in his mother's basement, sat across from me. The speeches had gone well. The principal of my school spoke about my leadership. A colleague discussed my commitment to student welfare. My ex-husband James, who had always been decent to me, even after our divorce, said kind things about my resilience and determination. Michael, my son, had video called from Tokyo, where he worked for an international NGO. His message was brief but genuine. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. You're the strongest person I know. I love you." I cried during his message. Quiet tears, the kind I'd perfected over decades. Then it was time for cake. The server wheeled it out on a silver cart. Everyone applauded. My mother stood and made a toast about how I'd always been the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who showed up. The way she said it made it sound less like a compliment and more like a job description. Less like praise and more like a role I'd been assigned at birth. As the server began to cut the first slice, David stood up. He was a large boy, broad-shouldered, with the kind of aggressive slouch that teenagers use when they're trying to take up too much space. I'd never particularly liked him, if I'm being honest. He had his mother's soreness and his father's entitlement, a combination that had produced someone who seemed to resent the world for not recognizing his specialness. "Let me do it," he said to the server, reaching for the cake knife. My mother laughed, that particular laugh that meant she thought whatever was about to happen would be charming or funny. Patricia smiled encouragingly. David picked up the entire cake, the 3-tier $400 raspberry and vanilla cake that my mother had ordered to celebrate my academic achievement, and held it at arm's length. "Wait," I heard myself say, not a shout. Not angry, just a word. Dropped into the moment like a stone into still water. He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I recognized because I'd seen it in his mother's eyes 1,000 times: contempt. Not anger, not even dislike. Just a fundamental absence of respect, as though I was not quite a person to him. "What?" he said. "Nothing," I replied, and I meant it. Whatever I was about to say dissolved into nothing. He turned back to the table, raised the cake above his head, and dropped it directly onto the marble floor. It shattered spectacularly. The sound was like broken glass, though of course it was cake and frosting. Pieces scattered everywhere. The raspberry filling splattered in bright red rivulets across the white marble. The room went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then the laughter started, my mother's first, a bright, trilling sound that seemed to give permission. Then Patricia's, lower and more satisfied. Then the other guests, uncertain at first, then emboldened by the family's approval. The sound built like a wave, laughter rolling through the room. David stood in the center of it all, grinning like he'd just done something brave. My nephew looked at the destroyed cake on the floor, then looked directly at me, and set it off the ground. The laughter intensified. People were actually holding their sides, tears streaming down their faces. The humor of the moment, the transgression, the humiliation, the audacity of it, was too much. I set down my napkin. I stood up slowly. I smiled that tight, practiced smile. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I need to use the restroom," and I walked out of the room while my family laughed. Int Bashar Om, the country club bathroom was pristine and empty. Marble counters, fresh flowers in a crystal vase, individual hand towels that probably cost more than my grocery budget for a week. I locked myself in one of the stalls and sat on the edge of the toilet with my hands shaking. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. Not yet, anyway. I was experiencing something deeper and colder than rage. I was experiencing clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally see something you've been refusing to see for decades. My family didn't love me. They used me. The distinction is important. My mother had called me 2 hours after the party started, reminding me what time I needed to arrive. "Don't be late," she'd said. First impressions matter. I'd been 15 minutes early. She hadn't mentioned the cake. She'd mentioned my hair, noting that it looked more professional than usual, which I understood to mean, "You usually look unprofessional." My sister had texted me that morning, "Can you bring some of those brownies you make? The expensive ones." People like those. She'd never asked how I was doing. Never acknowledged that today was my day. Just, "Can you bring something expensive that you make?" David had never said congratulations. Not once. And my mother's toast. I replayed it in my head now, sitting in that bathroom stall. The responsible one? The reliable one? The one who showed up? What she'd actually said was the one we can count on. The one who doesn't get to have needs. The one whose job it is to make our lives easier. I sat there for 15 minutes, maybe longer. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something inside me, some mechanism of compliance that had been running since childhood, simply stopped. I opened my phone and texted my best friend Susan, "Are you up? I need legal advice." Susan responded immediately. "Always, what happened?" And that's when I started to tell her. Panikal Susan. I drove home in silence. I didn't put on music. I didn't listen to a podcast. I just drove, hands at 10 and 2, my mind moving through the years like turning pages in a book I'd been forced to read. I arrived at my house at 9:47 p.m. and called Susan immediately. Susan Chen had been my best friend for 26 years. We'd met in a yoga class, of all places, when we were both going through divorces. She was an attorney specializing in family law and financial matters. She was also the kind of person who didn't believe in sugarcoating things. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. I told her about the cake, about the laughter, about the comment, about the years of loans I'd co-signed, the financial entanglement, the way my family had slowly made it so that I couldn't leave without losing everything. "How much are we talking?" Susan asked. I told her to $340,000 in co-signed loans across 4 separate accounts. A mortgage guarantee on my sister's house. A home equity line of credit on my mother's property. Plus, I'd been paying for my mother's annual country club membership, my nephew's car insurance, and various emergency bills for the past 3 years. Silence on the other end. "Maggie," Susan said carefully, "do you understand that you've essentially made yourself responsible for your family's financial life?" "I do now," I said. "And do you understand that they've been using that responsibility against you? That every time you push back on anything, they can invoke these loans, this financial dependency?" "I do," I said again. "Have you ever tried to set a boundary with them?" I thought about this. About the times I'd said no. About how those no's had been met with guilt, with reminders of past favors, with the implication that I was selfish for not helping. "Yes," I said. "But I've never made it stick." "Because you can't?" Susan said bluntly. "Not while you're financially entangled. They have leverage over you. And the thing about leverage is, it's not really about the money, it's about power. Your family has power over you, and as long as these loans exist, they'll use it." I sat with that for a moment. "What if I removed myself?" I asked. "From what?" "From the loans. From the financial agreements. All of it." Susan took a breath. "That would require some legal maneuvering. Some of these agreements you can exit. Others, like the mortgage guarantee, might require refinancing on your sister's part, which she probably won't do voluntarily. But there are steps you can take. Steps that would make it very clear to your family that the gravy train has stopped." "I want to do that," I said. "Tomorrow. I want to start tomorrow. Maggie, I want you to sleep on this. These decisions shouldn't be made in anger." But I wasn't angry. That was the thing. I was ice cold. I was clear. I was done. I've slept on it for 58 years, I said. I'm ready. The evening 80 Hama after I hung up with Susan, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my study, my favorite room in the house. Floor, took ceiling bookshelves, a leather armchair, a window that overlooked the garden. This room was mine in a way that the rest of the house wasn't. This was where I read, where I graded papers, where I made difficult decisions about school policy and student welfare. Tonight I sat in that chair and looked at my phone. There were already messages in the family group chat. A text from my mother, darling, David is just a boy. Boys do thoughtless things. I'm sure he didn't mean any harm. A text from my sister, Mom's right. You're being too sensitive. It was just a joke. A text from my cousin Margaret. Sai had cousins in the group chat, which somehow made it worse. Lol, that was actually hilarious. Your nephew has jokes! A text from my mother again. We're just disappointed you left early. It was rude to the other guests. I stared at these messages. I read them again and again. And I felt something solidify inside me, a kind of resolve that felt like bone. My family had made a choice. They had watched their son-brothered nephew humiliate me in front of 70 people. And they had laughed. Then, when I left, they'd made me the villain in the story. I wasn't the one who was wronged. I was the one who'd been rude. I was the one being too sensitive. This was the language of emotional abuse. I knew this. I'd read books about it. I'd counseled students who were experiencing it. But knowing it intellectually and living it were two different things. At 11:34 p.m., I sat down at my computer and opened my banking app. THNGHTO recommended I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I worked. First, I called the bank that held the co-signed loan for my nephew's car. I explained that I wanted to remove my name from the account. They told me it would require his consent or a refinancing. I scheduled an appointment for the following Monday. Then I called the mortgage company that held my sister's home loan, the one I'd co-signed as a guarantee. I explained the situation, carefully, without emotional language, and asked about my options. They explained that I could request to be removed as a co-signer, but that would require Patricia to refinance in her own name. Given her financial history, irregular employment, spotty credit, this would likely be denied. So essentially, the representative said kindly, "You're on this loan for the life of it, unless she pays it off or you both agree to modify it." "Thank you," I said, and I hung up. But here's what I realized: I didn't need to remove myself from every loan. I needed my family to understand that I was no longer willing to be their safety net. I opened my email and drafted a letter to my mother, my sister, and my nephew. I spent 2 hours on it, editing each sentence carefully. No anger, no blame, just facts. Dear Mom, Patricia, and David, I am writing to inform you of changes to our financial arrangement, effective immediately. As of tomorrow, I will no longer be available to provide financial assistance, emergency funds, or co-signed agreements. This includes but is not limited to 1. Monthly country club fees, a $125 month. I will no longer pay these. 2. David's car insurance, $89 a month. I will no longer pay these. 3. Emergency household expenses. I will no longer cover these. 4. Future loans or financial guarantees. I will no longer co-sign for any. Regarding existing co-signed agreements, I am taking legal steps to remove myself where possible. Where not possible, I am notifying the financial institutions that I can no longer guarantee these obligations. I have supported this family financially for over 20 years. I have co-signed loans totaling $30,000-$40,000. I have sacrificed my own financial security and personal life to meet needs that were not mine to meet. This ends today. You are all capable adults. You will figure out how to take care of yourselves the way capable adults do. I will be unavailable for the foreseeable future. If you need to reach me, I suggest you think very carefully about what you have to say. Maggie, I read it 5 times. I was tempted to soften it, to add explanations or apologies, but I didn't. This letter was not meant to be kind. It was meant to be clear. It was 24:07 a.m. I pressed send. Then I called my bank and had a long conversation with a loan specialist about how to formally withdraw as a co-guarantor on my mother's home equity line of credit. It was complicated. It would require her to refinance, but I submitted the paperwork anyway. By 4:00 a.m., I had sent written notification to every financial institution I was connected to, informing them that I was in the process of removing myself from all co-signed agreements and that they should contact the primary borrower immediately to discuss alternatives. Then, and only then, did I sit down and text Susan, "It's done. I've severed the financial cord. They're going to lose their minds when they wake up." Susan responded at 16:15 a.m. when she was running on the treadmill. "Good, they deserve to. Call me when the chaos starts. After I slept for exactly 4 hours, from 500 am to 900 am. I woke up to my phone vibrating continuously as though it were possessed. I didn't look at it immediately. I made coffee, I showered. I got dressed in comfortable clothes, jeans and a sweater, nothing fancy. And then, sitting at my kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a warm mug, I looked at my phone. The group chatted 53 new messages. My mother, what is this email? Maggie, you're being unreasonable. We need to talk about this. My sister, are you serious right now? Mom's country club fees? Those are family membership. My nephew, WTF? My mother again, call me immediately. Another text from my mother. This is not how we handle disagreements in this family. Another, I raised you better than this. And then, at 8:47 am, a call. My mother, I let it go to voicemail. She called again, and again, and again. Then Patricia called, then my Aunt Louise. Then my cousin Margaret. Then a number I didn't recognize, probably my mother calling from a different phone. I silenced my phone and finished my coffee. At 10:32 am, I received an email from my mother, Maggie. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is completely unacceptable. Your father would be ashamed of how you're treating your family. We raised you to be grateful and obedient. Instead, you've become selfish and cruel. If you continue down this path, we will have no choice but to sever all contact with you. Consider yourself warned. I read this email 3 times. I noted the irony. They were threatening to sever contact with me, as though I hadn't been doing everything they asked for 30 years, as though gratitude was a debt I owed them rather than a gift. I forwarded the email to Susan with a note. She's threatening to sever contact. I think she means it as a threat, but it sounds like a gift. Susan called me immediately. How are you holding up? She asked. Better than I expected, I said. Actually, I feel. I paused, searching for the right word. Light. I feel light. That's the weight lifting, Susan said. That's what happens when you finally put down something you've been carrying for decades. They're panicking, I said, looking at the messages continuing to pour in. Of course they are. Their ATM just declined. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in a long time. Maggie, Susan said, and her voice changed, became softer. I want you to know that what you're doing is brave. It's also going to get worse before it gets better. Your family is going to try everything to pull you back in. Guilt, manipulation, threats. They might even try to convince you that you're the one who's being unreasonable. I want you to be prepared for that. I'm prepared, I said. But I wasn't really. Nobody can ever be fully prepared for what happens when you finally say no to people who've built their lives on your yes. Teach Goskalied on. By noon, the calls had stopped. The messages continued, but they'd shifted in tone, from anger to panic. My mother, we need to discuss this reasonably. Come over for dinner this week. Patricia, you can't just cut us off. What if there's an emergency? My nephew, this is because of the cake thing, isn't it? Jesus, Mom, it was just a cake. My mother, I'm warning you, Maggie. Don't do this. Family is family. At 2:00 p.m., I received a call from my ex-husband, James. This was unexpected. Hey, he said carefully. Your mother called me. She's worried about you. She thinks you might be having some kind of mental health crisis. I felt a flash of rage at this. My mother had not only rejected me, but she was now characterizing my boundary, setting as a mental illness. I'm fine, I said to James. Better than fine. I'm finally taking care of myself. She said you sent some kind of email about cutting off all financial support? That's correct. There was a pause. Then James, who had always been a decent man despite our failed marriage, said, I think that might be the smartest thing you've done in years. I hadn't expected that. Really? I asked. Maggie, I've been watching you kill yourself for this family for 2 decades. Your mother calls you constantly. Your sister treats you like a personal bank. That nephew of yours is a spoiled brat, and your mother enables him. You deserve better. You deserve a life that isn't consumed by managing their needs. I didn't know you felt that way, I said. I haven't wanted to interfere, he said. Yes, I've felt that way for a long time. After I hung up with James, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Not sad tears, relief tears. Someone who knew me, really knew me, thought I was doing the right thing. At 4:00 p.m., I sent a message to my son Michael in Tokyo. Mom here. Big family stuff happening. I'll call you this weekend and explain, but I wanted you to know first I'm good. Better than I've been in years. More soon. Michael responded immediately. Dad called me and told me what you did. I'm so proud of you. About time. Love you. Even mine. By evening, the messages had become almost frantic. My mother had apparently spent the day making phone calls, free, trying to convince family members that I was the villain in this story. My Aunt Louise called to check on me. My cousin Margaret sent a passive-aggressive text about how some people think they're better than their families. But I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I simply existed in the silence I'd created. At 9:00 p.m., my phone buzzed with a notification, an email from the mortgage company. They had received my request to be removed as a co-signor on my sister's home loan and were processing a notice to my sister requesting that she refinance in her own name or that the loan would be called due. It was happening. It was actually happening. I sat in my study, in my leather chair, looking out at the garden that I'd tended so carefully for 20 years. Every plant in that garden was there because I'd wanted it to be. I'd chosen them. I'd cared for them. And when I didn't want a plant anymore, I could pull it out and replace it with something better. Why couldn't I have done that with my family? But the answer was simple. I had been taught, from childhood, that family was not negotiable. Family was a responsibility. Family was something you sacrificed for. The fact that my family treated me poorly was somehow my fault. I wasn't sacrificing enough, I wasn't grateful enough, I wasn't small enough. Tonight, I had finally, after 58 years, decided to renegotiate that contract. At 11:30 p.m., my mother sent one final message to the group chat: "We've chosen to sever all contact with Maggie. Effective immediately, she is no longer part of this family. Don't reach out to her. She's made her choice. We've made ours. Consider this matter closed." Patricia liked the message. I read it 3 times. And then I did something I hadn't planned to do. I opened my phone, and I texted my mother removing my name from every loan tomorrow. "You have 48 hours to figure out your financial situation. After that, the banks will handle it. Stay away forever." Then I blocked her number, and my sister's, and my nephew's, and my cousin Margaret's. THEMARNG, Oaf Rakameg. I woke at 6:00 am on Friday, the day after I'd sent the final text, and my heart was racing. Not from fear, from anticipation. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, pulling up each financial institution's website. I began the formal process of removing myself as a co-signor on every loan I could legally exit from. The car loan required David's consent. The mortgage required Patricia to refinance. The home equity line of credit required my mother to refinance or find a co-signor. But on the ones where I had legal recourse, I submitted the paperwork. By 8:30 am, I had filed formal requests with 4 separate financial institutions. By 9:00 am, the phone calls started. I didn't answer. I let them go to voicemail. Instead, I called my school and told them I was taking a personal day. Then I texted Susan, "The chaos has begun. Can you come over tonight? I need backup." Susan responded, "Already planned, bringing wine." The calls didn't stop. They came in waves. 9:15 am, my mother using a number I didn't recognize. Voicemail left: "Maggie, this is insane. We need to talk about this. You're being cruel." 9:47 am, an unknown number. I later realized it was my mother calling from my Aunt Louise's phone. Voicemail left: "Your mother is very upset. Your sister is in tears. You've devastated this family. Call us." 10:22 am, a call from the bank that held the car loan. Not my family, but I answered this one. They were asking me questions about my co-signor status and whether I was sure I wanted to proceed. I was. We discussed the implications. If David didn't co-sign the refinancing documents, the loan would be called due. 10:34 am, my nephew from a block number. He must have used someone else's phone. He left a message, and his voice was shaking with rage. "Maggie, this is David. What the hell are you doing? My car payment just went up $300 a month. My mom is freaking out. You can't just do this. You're a bitch, you know that? You're a vindictive bitch." I listened to that message 3 times. The anger in his voice was so pure, so certain of his own victimhood, that it almost made me laugh. He was shocked, genuinely shocked, that there were consequences for his actions. He'd spent 24 years getting away with behavior like this. The idea that the cake incident might actually result in a response from me had probably never crossed his mind. 10:58 am. My mother again, this time from the country club's main line. "Clever. Maggie, we are your family. Blood is blood. Whatever you think we've done, you need to forgive and move forward. This is un-Christian. This is unforgivable." At this point, I turned off my phone. Susan arrived at my house at 5:30 p.m. with 2 bottles of wine, take-out Thai food, and the kind of look that said she was prepared for whatever emotional state she might find me in. She found me sitting in my study, calm and reading a book. "How many times has your phone rang today?" she asked, setting down the food. "I stopped counting after the 15th call," I said. "I turned it off around 11, We settled into my living room with wine and pad thai, and I told her everything. Every voicemail, every call from an unknown number, every attempt to manipulate or guilt me into reversing my decision. This is textbook, Susan said between bites. When someone finally sets a boundary with manipulators, the manipulators go into panic mode. They escalate, they try everything. Guilt, shame, appeals to religion, appeals to family loyalty. Eventually they'll try something else. Like what? I ask. Usually, threats. Or they'll try to convince mutual acquaintances that you're the villain. Or they'll completely cut you off, which they've already done, as a way of punishing you. What they're hoping is that you'll break under the pressure and come crawling back. I won't, I said. I know, Susan said. But they don't believe that yet. They're still operating under the assumption that they have leverage over you. Once they realize they don't, they'll either accept the new reality or they'll escalate further. How long does this usually take? Susan took a long sip of wine. Depends on the person. For some people, a few weeks. For others, months, years. Some people never accept it. And in the meantime, you live your life. You don't answer their calls. You don't respond to their messages. You let the financial consequences do the talking. And most importantly, she looked directly at Myth. You don't let them pull you back in through the door of guilt or obligation or love or any of the other emotional levers they've been using. We talked for 3 more hours. We talked about what had happened at the party. We talked about my childhood, about how my mother had always positioned me as the responsible one, the strong one, the one who could handle anything. We talked about how that had set me up to be exploited. The thing about people like your mother, Susan said as the evening wore on, is that they believe in a fundamental hierarchy. They believe some people are meant to give and some people are meant to take. Your mother decided you were a giver. She organized her entire relationship with you around that decision. And now that you're refusing to give anymore, she's acting like you've betrayed some fundamental law of nature. How do I live with that? I asked. How do I live with knowing that my mother will probably never forgive me for this? Susan was quiet for a moment. You decide that her forgiveness isn't necessary for your peace of mind, and you accept that sometimes protecting yourself means losing people you love. Did you ever have to do that? I asked. Yes, she said simply. My father was emotionally abusive, brilliant man, but cruel. I spent my 20s trying to fix him, trying to prove to him that I was worth loving. I spent my 30s in therapy understanding why. I spent my 40s accepting that he would never change. Last year, I decided I was done. I told him I couldn't have contact with him anymore. He's been dead for 2 years, but if he were alive, I would still be making that choice. I felt tears running down my face. It's okay to grieve them, Susan said softly. The family you wish you had, I mean. Even while you're protecting yourself from the family you actually have. THE next to Moav Saturday morning, I turned my phone back on. 47 missed calls. 83 text messages. 17 voicemails. I scrolled through them quickly, not reading most of them. But there was one from my mother that made me stop. Your father called me from heaven and told me he's ashamed of you. I read that message 3 times. My father had been dead for 17 years. My mother had claimed many things over the years, that she communicated with the dead, that she had psychic abilities, that she had special insights into God's will. But this message took it to a new level. This wasn't manipulation. This was gaslighting dressed up in the language of spirituality. I showed it to Susan when she came by Sunday morning. She read it and shook her head. Your mother is desperate, she said. This is what happens when the usual weapons don't work. Guilt, obligation, family loyalty. She's bringing out the spiritual weapons. It's actually a sign that what you've done is working. She's panicking because she's lost her leverage over you. On Monday, my lawyer, yes? I'd hired one, Susan had insisted, sent formal letters to my mother and sister notifying them that any further attempts at contact would be considered harassment. The letters specified that I was removing myself from all financial obligations and that any attempt to sue me or pursue legal action against me would be defended against vigorously. On Tuesday, I went back to work. My colleagues noticed something different about me. I was lighter, more present. When a teacher came to me with a problem, I listened completely instead of with half my mind on what family obligation I needed to manage. My assistant commented that I seemed happier. I told her I was prioritizing my own well-being. On Wednesday, the mortgage company called. Patricia had been contacted about refinancing. She had not responded. The company wanted to know if I, as the guarantor, Intended to take over the loan if she defaulted. I told them no. I told them to send her a formal notice that the loan would be called due if she didn't refinance within 30 days. I was no longer responsible for her financial obligations. Are you sure? The representative asked, sounding surprised. This is a significant decision? I'm sure, I said. Birai Keen Poide on Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after the cake incident, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and saw my sister standing on my porch. Her face blotchy from crying. I almost didn't open the door. But something, a final remaining thread of the old Maggie, the Maggie who always answered when family called, made me do it. Patricia, I said, opening the door but not inviting her in. What are you doing here? We need to talk, she said. Her voice was desperate, raw. Maggie, please. Please just talk to me. I looked at my sister, the woman who had laughed while my graduation cake was thrown on the floor, who had liked my mother's message severing contact. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a profound absence of feeling. We don't have anything to talk about, I said quietly. You've ruined everything, Patricia said. Mom's applying for a new mortgage on her own, and the bank is saying the interest rate will be 3 points higher because of her age and income. She might lose the house. David can't afford the car payment now. My refinancing got denied because the lender said the original loan was too risky to take on a loan. Do you understand what you've done? Yes, I said. I understand perfectly. I've stopped enabling your poor financial choices. You're experiencing consequences for the first time in your adult lives. You're being cruel. Patricia said, and she was crying now. This isn't like you? No, I said. This is exactly like me. This is who I actually am, underneath all the sacrificing and the enabling. This is the part of me that you've never met, because I've been too busy trying to keep you comfortable? So that's it? Patricia asked. After everything we've done for you, you're just going to abandon us? And there it was, the question that revealed everything. After everything we've done for you. As if my mother's choice to give birth to me, as if my sister's existence in my life, as if my nephew's simple being alive, as if all of this was a favor I owed them repayment for. You didn't do anything for me, I said quietly. I did everything for you. For decades, I sacrificed my own life for yours, and I did it willingly at first, because I loved you. But somewhere along the way, you started to believe that you were owed that sacrifice. You started to believe that my willingness to give meant I had an obligation to keep giving forever, no matter how you treated me. And I'm done believing that. Mom said you'd say something like this? Patricia said bitterly. She said you'd justify it by blaming us for being ungrateful? I'm not blaming you for being ungrateful, I said. I'm taking responsibility for allowing myself to be used. But that responsibility ends now. Patricia stood there for another moment, and I could see her mind working, trying to find the right words, the right guilt trip, the right emotional lever to pull. But she was out of levers. If you close this door, she said slowly, that's it, we're done. Mom means it. She'll never speak to you again. I know, I said. And I'm going to close this door now. I closed the door gently, not with anger, not with drama, just the quiet click of a latch. Through the peephole, I watched Patricia stand there for another 30 seconds. Then she turned and walked back to her car. Selen si hat followed that the calls stopped after that, not gradually, completely. As though someone had flipped a switch. The text stopped. The voicemail stopped. The attempts to reach me through other family members stopped. My mother had meant what she said. She had severed all contact. And it was the best gift she'd ever given me. In the silence that followed, I began to understand something. I had been so focused on my family's response to my boundary setting that I hadn't really thought about what came after. I'd been so afraid of the rejection that I hadn't considered what life might look like when the constant demands finally ended. The answer? It looked like freedom. For the first time in my adult life. I didn't have a family obligation hanging over my head. I didn't have financial entanglements I needed to manage. I didn't have my mother calling to ask for something. I didn't have my sister complaining about her life. I didn't have my nephew's entitled demands. I had space. Actual, physical, emotional space. That Friday, I called Michael in Tokyo. Hey Mom, he said, answering on the second ring. How are you? I'm good, I said. I'm really good, actually. I wanted to tell you that the family situation is resolved. Grandmother and Aunt Patricia have decided not to have contact with me. I know, Michael said. Grandma called me screaming about it. Told me I was a bad son for supporting you? I'm sorry, I said. Don't be, Michael said. Mom, I was proud of you before, when I heard what you were doing. But I'm even more proud now. You stood your ground. You didn't let them pull you back in. Most people don't have that strength. It doesn't feel strong, I said. It feels lonely. It is lonely, Michael said. But it's the good kind of lonely. The kind where you're alone with yourself. Not alone because people have abandoned you. You choose this solitude. That's power. After I hung up with Michael, I sat in my study and thought about everything that had happened in the past week. I'd severed financial ties with my family. I'd blocked their numbers. I'd hired a lawyer. I'd refused to be manipulated or guilt-tripped back into compliance. And I'd done all of it without screaming, without cruelty, without violence, just quiet, firm, adult boundary setting. And my family, rather than accept that boundary, had chosen to sever contact entirely. It was perfect. Not because I had won, but because I had finally prioritized myself over the family's comfort. TWOEKS Latar, the house was quiet in a way I'd never experienced before. Not the quiet of an empty home. I'd known that before, when Michael was at college and James and I were navigating the final years of our marriage. This was a different kind of quiet. This was the quiet of a home that was truly mine, not a way station between family emergencies. I'd stopped checking my phone obsessively. The familiar pattern of anxiety followed by relief, that my family hadn't called, that I didn't have an obligation to manage, had finally broken. I no longer had the muscle memory of panic. 2 weeks into the silence, I realized something. I didn't miss them. I'd been afraid I would. I'd prepared myself for devastating loneliness. For the moment when the adrenaline and resolve wore off, and I'd be left with the hollow space where a family should be. But that moment hadn't come. What had come instead was something unexpected. Clarity. Clarity about how much space my family had taken up in my mind. Clarity about how often I'd second-guessed myself, wondering if I was being selfish for wanting my own life. A clarity about the constant background hum of guilt that had been playing in my consciousness for so long I'd stopped noticing it. Now, without that hum, I could hear myself think. Free the financial racolink, the first concrete victory came in the mail. A letter from the mortgage company informing me that my sister had successfully refinanced her home loan in her own name. I was officially removed as a guarantor. The bank's letter was formal and bureaucratic, but what it actually meant was this: I was free. Free from the financial responsibility. Free from the leverage my family had held over me. I called Susan and read her the letter. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like breathing," I said. "Like I've been holding my breath for 20 years, and I finally exhaled." The car loan was more complicated. David had failed to qualify for a refinancing on his own. According to the bank's letter, he had missed 2 payments. The vehicle was at risk of repossession. I felt a flicker of something, guilt, maybe, but I let it pass through me without taking hold. This was his consequence, not mine. My mother's home equity line had been frozen pending refinancing, which she apparently had not done. I didn't know the details. I didn't want to know the details. Susan had warned me about this, the urge to track what was happening to them, as though their suffering was a measure of my success. "Don't do that," she'd warned. "That's still them having power over you. That's still you measuring your worth by their pain. The real freedom is not knowing. The real freedom is not caring." So I stopped checking. I didn't call the bank. I didn't try to figure out what was happening. I simply let the consequences unfold without my involvement. It was harder than it should have been. Parafiel, SEFTA at work, something had shifted in me as well. I'd always been a good principal, engaged, thoughtful, fair. But I'd carried the stress of my family life into my professional life. I was constantly tired, constantly managing multiple emotional crises, constantly operating at a mental capacity of about 70%, because 30% was always reserved for whatever family emergency was currently unfolding. Now, without that drain, I was fully present. I noticed it first in a meeting with my vice principal and a guidance counselor about a student who was struggling. I'd always listened to their input, but this time I actually heard them. I wasn't formulating my response while they were still talking. I wasn't wondering if I needed to get home to deal with something my mother had texted about. "You seem different," my vice principal commented after the meeting. "Good different. Like you're actually here?" "I feel more here," I said. That same week, a young teacher, fresh out of college, bright but struggling with classroom management, came to my office in tears. She was thinking about quitting. The kids weren't listening. She wasn't making an impact. She felt like a failure. I spent 2 hours with her. I told her about my first year as a teacher, about how I'd cried in my car 3 times a week. I told her about the moments when I wanted to quit. But I also told her about the breakthrough moments, the students who came back years later, and told her she'd changed their lives. You have to decide, I told her. Free. Whether you're in this for validation from people who might never give it, or whether you're in this because you believe it matters. The first one will destroy you. The second one will sustain you. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. Were you talking about teaching? She asked. I was talking about everything, I said. She came back the next week. She was still struggling, but she was also determined. She was staying. That evening, I sat in my study and realized something. I was good at this. I was good at leadership, at helping people, at creating spaces where people could grow. But I'd been wasting so much of that capacity on my family. On people who didn't want to grow. On people who wanted to stay exactly where they were and pull me down with them. Now I could give that capacity to people who actually wanted it. Who actually appreciated it. Who actually changed because of it. Tishi Litar. 3 weeks after the silence began, I received a letter. Not an email. A physical letter, in an envelope with my name handwritten on the front. It was from my Aunt Louise, my mother's sister, someone I'd always liked but had kept at a distance because she was too close to the family drama. Inside was a card with a watercolor of flowers on it. Her handwriting was shaky, as though she'd written it multiple times before getting it right. Dear Maggie, I'm writing to tell you something your mother told me not to write. But I'm 76 years old, and I'm tired of being afraid of her, so I'm writing it anyway. I think you did the right thing. I've watched your family take advantage of your generosity for decades. I've watched your mother make decisions that hurt you and then justify them by saying she was protecting the family. I've watched your sister blame you for everything that goes wrong in her life. And I've watched you absorb all of it with this sad smile, as though you deserved to be treated that way. You don't deserve it. You never did. I'm writing to tell you that you have my support. Even though I can't tell your mother that. I'm writing to tell you that you're braver than I was. I let my family diminish me for 60 years. I'm not going to do it for the last years I have left. I hope you'll let me see you sometime. Not because I'm loyal to your mother, but because I'm proud of you, and I'd like to tell you that in person. With love, Aunt Louise. I read that letter 5 times. And then I called her. Did you write this? I asked when she answered. I did, she said, her voice wavering. Your mother's not speaking to me right now. She found out I was thinking of calling you and she said if I did, I was betraying the family. But Maggie, I'm old. I don't have time for that kind of loyalty anymore. I have time for what's true. Do you want to have coffee? I asked. Next Saturday. I would love that, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. We met at a small cafe near my house the following Saturday. Aunt Louise arrived in a yellow cardigan, her white hair curled softly, her hands shaking slightly as she held her coffee. Your mother called the house yesterday, Louise said without preamble. She wanted to know if I was meeting with you. I told her yes. She said that meant I was taking sides against the family. I asked her which side was the family, the side that treats people with respect, or the side that throws graduation cakes on the floor. She hung up on me. I'm sorry, I said. I don't want to cause a rift between you and her. There's already a rift, Louise said. There's been a rift for years. But I've been pretending there wasn't because it was easier. You've just brought it into the light. And honestly, I'm relieved. We talked for 3 hours. She told me things I'd never known about my mother, how she'd always been difficult, how she'd always needed to be the center of attention, how she'd treated Louise poorly for decades but Louise had never pushed back because she was the younger sister and that was what younger sisters did. I'm 76, Louise said again. And I'm just now learning that I don't have to accept how people treat me. You learned it at 58. You're ahead of me? When we parted, Louise hugged me tightly. I love you, she said. Your mother doesn't know I'm saying this, but I needed you to know. I love you. And I'm proud of you. At Teach Fini Nasil Fidam, by the end of the 3rd week, I'd calculated my new financial situation. Without the country club fees, David's car insurance, my mother's emergency expenses, and the stress-related health issues that had plagued me, Els migraines, high blood pressure, I was saving approximately $850 per month. That's $10,200 per year. That's $102,000 over the next decade. But more than that, I'd freed up mental and emotional capacity that had been consumed by managing my family's financial crisis. I could breathe. I could plan. I could actually consider what I wanted for the rest of my life, instead of constantly reacting to what my family needed from me. I called a financial advisor, a woman Susan had recommended, and we started planning. I could retire at 62, not necessarily comfortably but securely. Or I could work longer and build a significant nest egg. I could travel. I could invest in my home. I could take sabbaticals. I could finally, after a lifetime of making choices based on other people's needs, make choices based on my own desires. How does it feel? The financial advisor asked as we worked through the numbers. Terrifying, I admitted. And exhilarating. Most people don't get this chance, she said. Most people are so entangled with their families that they never gain this kind of financial autonomy. You've done something most people are too afraid to do. THU next spied Kyle on day 24 of the silence. My phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Hello? I said cautiously. Hi, it's David, my nephew. The boy who'd thrown my cake. The boy who'd called me a vindictive bitch. Yes, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'm calling because I wanted to apologize, he said, and he sounded younger than I'd ever heard him sound. About the cake thing. And about calling you that name. I said nothing. I waited. My mom says I've destroyed our car situation, and she says it's my fault, and she says maybe I owed you an apology. But that's not why I'm calling. I mean, that's part of it, but not the main reason. Okay, I said. Why are you calling? I read something, David said. This thing about how people don't realize how their actions affect other people because nobody ever shows them the consequences. And I realized, I've never had consequences before. You always made it so that nobody around me had consequences, and I think I've turned into kind of a selfish asshole because of it. I had to sit down. That's very self-aware, I said carefully. I don't know if I actually believe it yet, David said, but I'm working with a therapist now. That's part of the consequence thing, and he's helping me understand how I gotta be this way. Anyway, I'm sorry, about the cake, about the insults, about being a selfish asshole. Okay, I said. I appreciate that. Are you going to accept my apology? He asked. Yes, I said. I accept it. Cool, he said, and then he paused. I don't know if this means we can have a relationship or whatever, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. That's good, David, I said. That's all any of us can do. After I hung up, I sat in shock. I hadn't expected that. I'd made peace with never hearing from any of them again. The idea that my nephew would actually examine his own behavior, would actually feel remorse, would actually apologize. It was almost more disorienting than the initial rejection. I called Susan immediately. He apologized, she asked, sounding as surprised as I felt. He's in therapy, I said. He's working on his stuff. How do you feel about that? I don't know. I said honestly. I feel something. But I don't think I'm ready to rebuild a relationship with him yet. And I don't think I need to. I think I can just accept that he's trying to be better, and I can respect that, and I can still maintain my distance. That's wisdom, Susan said. That's knowing the difference between forgiveness and re-engagement. A THEACPTANC. By the end of the 4th week, something remarkable had happened. I'd stopped waiting for my mother or sister to reach out. It sounds simple, but it wasn't. For 58 years, some part of me had been waiting for them to apologize, to acknowledge that they'd treated me poorly, to offer the validation and love I'd been seeking my entire life. Now I'd stopped waiting, not because I'd given up hope, but because I'd realized that their approval was never going to fill the hole I'd been trying to fill with their approval. That hole wasn't something they could fix. It was something I'd have to fix myself. I sat down one evening and wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. I forgive myself for needing their love so badly that I accepted their abuse. I forgive myself for mistaking obligation for affection, for confusing sacrifice with love. I forgive myself for not seeing what was happening until now. And I honor myself for finally, standing up, not in anger, not in cruelty, but in quiet, firm boundary setting. I honored myself by choosing my own well-being over their comfort. This is what revenge actually is: not hurting them, not destroying them, not making them feel the way they made me feel. This is revenge living well, being happy, becoming the person I want to be, instead of the person they needed me to be. This is revenge freedom. Ral Kaust, but I would be lying if I said there wasn't a cost. There was grief, deep, complex grief. Not for the family I had, but for the family I'd always wanted. For the mother who would have been proud of me without conditions. For the sister who would have defended me instead of laughing at me. For the nephew who would have valued me instead of disrespecting me. I grieved for the belief I'd held my entire life, that if I was just good enough, just generous enough, just available enough, they would finally love me the way I needed to be loved. That belief was gone now, and I mourned it. Susan helped me sit with that grief instead of running from it. "This is the hardest part," she said one evening as we sat in my living room. "This is where most people break. They set the boundary, and then the grief hits them like a truck, and they convince themselves they made a mistake, that they should go back, that it wasn't that bad. Was it that bad?" I asked her. "Or am I exaggerating in my mind now?" "You're not exaggerating," Susan said. "You were financially exploited. You were emotionally manipulated. You were publicly humiliated. You were made to feel that your worth was dependent on what you could do for other people. That's abuse, Maggie. Soft abuse, maybe. Family abuse. But abuse nonetheless. And they might never acknowledge that," I said. "They might not," Susan agreed. "They might spend the rest of their lives believing that you're the villain in this story. That you're the one who betrayed them. That you're selfish and cruel. How do I live with that?" "You live with it the same way you do everything else," Susan said. "By making a choice about whose truth matters to you. You can believe what they believe, or you can believe what you know to be true. I suggest believing yourself." By the end of the 4th week, I'd made some decisions about my life. First, I was going to take a sabbatical from my job. Not immediately. I'd need to plan for it. But within the next 18 months, I was going to take a year off. I was going to travel. I was going to sit. I was going to read. I was going to finally do the things I'd been putting off for decades because I was too busy taking care of my family. Second, I was going to rebuild my friendships. Susan and I had been close. But I'd been so consumed with family management that I'd let other relationships atrophy. I was going to call old friends. I was going to have people over for dinner. I was going to invest in connections that actually fed my soul. Third, I was going to figure out who Maggie Foster actually was when she wasn't being the responsible one, the reliable one. The one who showed up. I thought maybe I was someone who loved to read. Someone who loved to cook. Someone who loved quiet mornings and meaningful conversations and being present for people who actually wanted my presence. Someone who was strong not because she could carry everyone else's weight, but because she could stand on her own. Fourth, and most importantly, I was going to honor my nephew's apology by allowing him to continue his journey toward being better. But I was going to do it from a distance. Not because I was punishing him, but because I needed to protect myself. I could wish him well without being responsible for his well-being. I could be proud of his growth without sacrificing my own healing. On day 28 of the silence, I stood in my garden and looked at the plants I'd tended so carefully over the years. Some were thriving, some were struggling. Some I'd planted in the wrong spot and would need to relocate. I thought about my life. About the things I'd cultivated that served me, and about the things I'd cultivated out of obligation or guilt that actually depleted me. It was time to start moving things around. Time to plant new seeds. Time to see what would grow when I stopped pouring all my energy into keeping things alive that were never going to flourish. The sunset was beautiful that evening. Pink and gold and orange streaking across the sky. I stood there in my garden, in the house that was finally just mine, in the life that I was finally reclaiming, and I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Peace. The letter came on a Tuesday morning in an envelope so thick it could barely fit in my mailbox. I didn't recognize the handwriting. It was shaky, uncertain, nothing like my mother's precise penmanship. I opened it slowly, as though it might contain something that would hurt me. Inside were 34 handwritten pages. The first page read, "Dear Maggie, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll throw it away. I don't know if you'll be angry, or if you'll feel nothing. But I need to write it anyway. Because I can't live with myself anymore if I don't try. Your mother told me I wasn't allowed to write to you. She said that if I reached out, I would be betraying the family. But I realized something. The family you're describing, the family I'm part of, is already betrayed. And I'm tired of pretending I don't know that. This letter is my truth. Take it or leave it. With love, if you can still accept that. Patricia." I sat down on my kitchen floor and began to read. Home. What followed was the most honest thing I'd ever read from my sister. She wrote about our childhood, how our mother had positioned us against each other, how she'd told Patricia that I was the favorite, free. How that resentment had poisoned our relationship before it even began. She wrote about how she'd watched me get praise for being responsible and had internalized a deep belief that she was the failure, the problem child, the one who couldn't do anything right. I started to resent you for being good at everything, Patricia wrote. I told myself that you were arrogant, that you thought you were better than me. The truth was simpler and sadder. I hated myself, and I blamed you for making me hate myself by being everything I wasn't. She wrote about the loans, about how taking money from me had made her feel powerful and ashamed at the same time, about how she'd known, on some level, that I was sacrificing for her, and how that knowledge had made her feel less like my sister and more like someone who was draining you. I told myself stories about why I deserved that money, she wrote. I told myself you were selfish for not helping more. I told myself you were lucky and I was unlucky. But the truth is that you were kind and I was ungrateful. That you were generous and I was greedy. That you were trying to hold the family together and I was helping Mom tear it apart. She wrote about David, about how she'd given him everything because she hadn't received what she needed as a child. About how she'd never set boundaries with him because she was afraid of losing him. About how watching him throw my graduation cake on the floor had been a wake-up call, that she'd raised a child who was cruel and entitled, and that she was responsible for that. I laughed at you that night, she wrote, and I've hated myself for it every day since. I laughed because Mom laughed, because it was easier to join in the cruelty than to stand up against it, because I'm a coward. Patricia wrote that she'd started therapy 3 weeks ago. Not because she wanted to make amends with me, though she did, but because she was falling apart. The mortgage refinancing had forced her to confront how precarious her financial situation was. David's crisis had forced her to confront how poorly she'd parented. And my abandonment had forced her to confront the possibility that she'd destroyed the one person who'd actually loved her unconditionally. My therapist asked me what would happen if I told you the truth, Patricia wrote. Not the story I tell myself, not the justifications I've built up, but the actual truth. That I resented you. That I was jealous of you. That I let Mom use you and I participated in that use. That I watched you sacrifice everything and instead of protecting you, I asked for more. She asked me if I was ready to lose you. And I realized that I already had. The moment I laughed at that cake hitting the floor, I lost you. The moment I liked Mom's message about severing contact, I lost you. I just didn't realize it until you made it official. Patricia wrote about her marriage, about how her husband had left her 6 months ago because, according to him, she was emotionally unavailable and constantly angry, about how she'd blamed him for abandoning her during hard times, about how her therapist had gently pointed out that maybe she'd been the one doing the abandoning, that maybe her constant anger was a way of keeping people from getting close enough to hurt her. I think I learned that from Mom, Patricia wrote. I think I learned that love is something you have to defend yourself against. That people will hurt you if you let them. That it's safer to hurt them first. On page 16, Patricia wrote what I can only describe as a real apology. Not the kind where you say, I'm sorry you feel that way, but the kind where you actually take responsibility. I am sorry for laughing at you that night. I am sorry for every time I asked for money instead of asking how you were doing. I am sorry for every birthday of yours that I forgot while expecting you to remember mine. I am sorry for treating you like an ATM instead of a sister. I am sorry for letting Mom use you. I am sorry for using you myself. I am sorry for being a terrible sister and a worse daughter and an even worse mother. But more than that, I am sorry for the ways I hurt you that went beyond those specific incidents. I am sorry for every time I made you feel like your love wasn't enough. I am sorry for every time I made you feel like you owed me something just for existing in the same family. I am sorry for teaching my son to treat people the way I treated you. And I'm sorry for not saying this to your face. I'm writing it in a letter because I know you don't want to see me. And I respect that. I respect your boundary, even though it breaks my heart. On page 22, she wrote something that made me cry. I want you to know that none of this is about me trying to get you back. I'm not writing this hoping you'll forgive me and we'll go back to the way things were. The way things were was terrible. And you were right to leave. I'm writing this because I finally understand what I did to you, and I can't keep living with that knowledge without telling you I know. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me a relationship. You don't owe me anything. I'm writing this so that you can know, so that you can be absolutely certain that you were right. You were right to leave. You were right to set boundaries. You were right to prioritize your own well-being over my comfort. And I'm sorry it took you leaving for me to understand that. Tichi Pajise Bopa Mom pages 24 through 30 were the hardest to read because they were about our mother. Patricia wrote that Dorothy had contacted her lawyer after I'd removed myself from the loans. That our mother was considering suing me for damages, claiming that I'd deliberately harmed her financially. That she'd asked Patricia to be a witness against me, to testify that I'd been cruel and calculated. I said no, Patricia wrote. For the first time in my life, I said no to Mom. I told her that you weren't cruel or calculated, that you were protecting yourself, that I understood why you'd done it, and that she should too. Mom is furious with me now. She won't speak to me. She told me that by not supporting her lawsuit, I was betraying her, that I was choosing you over her. And for the first time in my life, I'm okay with that. I'm choosing you. Not because I'm trying to punish her, but because I finally understand what she's been doing to both of us our whole lives. Patricia wrote about how Dorothy had a pattern of finding people to take care of her financially, emotionally, and logistically, and then resenting them for it. How it started with our father, who'd left the family when we were young. Something I hadn't known was something Patricia understood. How it had moved to Patricia, and then to me. And how now that both of us were refusing to play that role, our mother was unraveling. I'm not saying this to make you feel sorry for her, Patricia wrote. I'm saying this so you understand that her rejection of you is not about you. It's about her own terror that she won't be able to make someone else responsible for her life. She's panicking. And her way of panicking is to declare that you're dead to her, hoping that will scare you back into compliance. It won't work. She knows it won't work now, but she's hoping anyway. Tichi Final Pagis, the last few pages of the letter were about David. Patricia wrote that she'd shown him the letter I'd received from him, the one where he'd apologized. She wrote that David was genuinely changing, that he was working in therapy on understanding entitlement and consequence. That he'd gotten a job, was paying his own car payment, was starting to understand what it meant to be responsible for himself. I don't know if you want a relationship with him, Patricia wrote. But I wanted you to know that something good is coming out of all of this. Your boundary setting didn't destroy us. It woke us up. On the final page, Patricia wrote, I don't expect to hear from you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything except that you read this and know that I understand. That I finally understand what I did and what I didn't do. That I understand that you had to leave in order to survive. That I understand that your peace is more important than my comfort. That I understand that sometimes the most loving thing a family member can do is step back. If you ever want to see me again, I would welcome that. If you never want to hear from me again, I understand that too. But I needed you to know that I see you now, I see what you did, and I'm grateful for it. Even if you don't want my gratitude. Love, Patricia The Mar N Goftier. I didn't sleep that night. I read the letter 3 more times. I wept at various passages. I felt anger at points, at the fact that it had taken this amount of distance for my sister to see me, for my nephew to apologize, for anyone to actually acknowledge what I'd been doing all those years. But underneath the anger was something else. Something that felt like the beginning of healing. I called Susan at 6:00 a.m. She wrote me a letter, I said. Patricia, 4 pages. What does it say? Susan asked, her voice alert despite the early hour. I summarized it for her. The therapy, the realizations, the acknowledgement of what she'd done, the apology that actually sounded like an apology. How do you feel? Susan asked. I don't know, I said honestly. I feel something, but I'm not sure what it is. Take your time figuring it out, Susan said. This is big. This is someone in your family actually taking responsibility. That doesn't erase what happened. But it changes the story a little bit. Sue and I spent the next week sitting with the letter, not responding to it, just sitting with it. I let myself feel the things I needed to feel, the anger that she'd let it take me leaving for her to understand, the sadness that it had to happen this way. But also, underneath it, a small seed of hope. Hope that maybe, in time, there could be a different kind of relationship with my sister. Not the old one where I was the giver and she was the taker, but a new one, where we were both adults trying to heal. I called Aunt Louise. Did Patricia tell you about the letter? I asked. She mentioned she was writing something, Louise said carefully. She didn't tell me what was in it. She apologized, I said. Really apologized. Took responsibility for the whole thing. There was silence on the other end. That's good, Louise said finally. That's really good? Does that change things for you? I don't know yet, I said. But I'm thinking about it. The following Saturday I did something I didn't expect to do. I texted Patricia. I read your letter, I need time. But I'm not saying no. Her response came back in seconds. That's all I'm asking for. Thank you for reading it. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain. TWOBUKS Latar Tea Coffee. I agreed to meet Patricia for coffee. Not at my house, not at hers. On neutral ground? At the same cafe where I'd met with Aunt Louise. I was nervous in a way I hadn't been in weeks. My heart was racing as I drove there. I almost turned around twice. Patricia was already seated when I arrived, at a small table in the corner. She looked different. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "Hi," she said as I sat down. I said. We sat in silence for a moment. Neither of us quite knew how to be in this new dynamic, one where I wasn't the giver and she wasn't the taker, where neither of us had automatic rights to the other's emotional labor. "I'm in therapy twice a week," Patricia said, not waiting for me to speak. "I'm working through a lot of stuff. It's hard, but it's good hard, you know. Not the kind of hard where everything's falling apart. The kind of hard where you're building something." "That's good," I said. "I've been thinking about what you said," Patricia continued, "about how I treated you, and I want to acknowledge something that I put in the letter, but I want to say to your face." I nodded, waiting. "I was jealous of you," Patricia said, and her voice was steady. "Not just regular jealous, like I wish I had what you have, but deep, soul-level jealous. You were good at everything, you were strong, you didn't need anything from anyone, and I needed everything from everyone, and I hated you for it." She paused. "But I also need you to know that I'm not jealous anymore. I'm proud of you. I'm genuinely, truly proud of what you did. I'm proud that you had the strength to say no, that you had the courage to leave, that you didn't destroy us, you just stopped letting us destroy you." I felt tears running down my face. "I don't know if we can go back to what we were," I said carefully. "We can't," Patricia agreed, "and I don't think either of us would want to. But maybe we can build something new, something healthier. Something where you're not responsible for me and I'm not using you." "I'd like that," I said, "but I need to take it slow." "I know," Patricia said, "and I'm okay with slow. He Chirichi and Movidi forward over the next 2 months. Patricia and I had coffee twice a week. We didn't jump back into a close relationship. We couldn't. Too much had happened, but we built something new, a tentative friendship between two women who'd finally admitted to themselves that they hadn't been treating each other well." Patricia told me about her therapy, about how she was learning to separate herself, worth from what she had or didn't have, about how she was redefining her relationship with her son, setting boundaries with him the way I'd set boundaries with the family. I told her about my plans for my sabbatical, about the trip I was planning to France, about how I was finally, after years of sacrifice, going to do things just because I wanted to do them. "You deserve that," Patricia said one day. "You deserve to be selfish for a while." "It's weird," I said. "Doing things for myself. It feels wrong sometimes, like I should be doing something productive, something that benefits someone else." "That's the programming," Patricia said. "Mom did that to both of us. She made us feel like our value came from what we could do for other people. It's going to take a while to reprogram that." On one of these coffee dates, Patricia told me something about our mother. "Mom got a diagnosis," she said quietly. "She has early-stage Alzheimer's. The lawyer thing, the threat to sue you, it's off the table now. Apparently, she's becoming forgetful. She forgets things you've said. Sometimes she forgets she's angry at you." I felt something shift in my chest. "How are you dealing with that?" I asked. "Honestly, I'm still angry at her," Patricia said. "The diagnosis doesn't erase what she did. It doesn't retroactively make her a good mother. But it does make me more aware that her time is limited. And I have to decide if I want to spend that limited time trying to get something from her that she's never going to give me, or if I want to accept who she is and move forward." "What have you decided?" I asked. "I'm not sure yet," Patricia said, "but I'm leaning toward acceptance. Not for her sake. For mine." Tea leader off from Mum 2 months into this fragile rebuilding with Patricia, I received a letter from my mother. It was handwritten, which was unusual. It was also short, which was very unusual. "Dear Maggie, I don't remember why I was angry with you. Sometimes I remember something about a party, but I can't quite hold on to it. The doctor says my memory is going to get worse. I wanted to write this while I can still write. I'm sorry if I hurt you. I don't remember doing it, but I believe you that I did. Your mother? Dorothy, I read that letter once and then I set it down. This was not the apology I'd been waiting for my entire life. This was not my mother taking responsibility. This was not the healing moment I'd fantasized about 1,000 times. But it was something. It was an admission that she'd hurt me, even if she couldn't remember exactly how. It was an opening. However small, I showed it to Susan. What do you want to do? She asked. I don't know, I said. I don't want to forgive her. I don't want to resume a close relationship, but I don't want to hold on to this anger forever. You don't have to make a decision about it now, Susan said. You can sit with this. You can see if anything feels right as time goes on. By the end of the 6th week, my life had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. I was in touch with Patricia again, though carefully. I'd received an apology from my nephew that seemed genuine. My Aunt Louise had become a regular presence in my life. And my mother had become someone I could pity more than hate. But the most important shift was internal. I no longer felt the constant pull to fix my family. I no longer felt responsible for their well-being. I no longer felt guilty for prioritizing myself. I'd spent 58 years learning that I was worth something only insofar as I was useful to other people. And in the last 3 months, I'd begun learning something else, that I had worth simply by existing, that I deserved care and kindness, first and foremost from myself, that my life didn't have to be a service project. This was the real revenge. Not the destruction of my family, not even their suffering, though some of them had suffered. The real revenge was my freedom. The real revenge was knowing that I'd finally put myself first. And the grace, the unexpected grace, was that in doing so, I'd given my sister and nephew something too, the possibility of being better people. The possibility of facing their own shadows. The possibility of growth. I thought revenge meant hurting the people who hurt you. But I was learning that the deepest revenge is living well. Is healing. Is choosing yourself without apology, and then gracefully allowing others to evolve alongside you. Not responsible for their evolution, but open to it. That was a kind of grace I hadn't expected to find. Taru months later, the autumn leaves were turning when I received the call from Aunt Louise. Your mother's in the hospital? She said without preamble. She had a fall. They think she's broken her hip. Patricia's there now. They're asking if anyone else can come. I was quiet for a long moment. Maggie, Louise asked. Are you there? I'm here. I'm just processing. I know this is complicated, Louise said gently, but I thought you should know. After I hung up, I sat in my study for an hour. I didn't call anyone. I didn't make a decision. I just sat with the weight of it. My mother was 68 years old. She was losing her mind. She'd fallen and broken her hip. And I was supposed to feel what? Guilty, responsible, obligated. But I didn't feel any of those things. What I felt was something more complicated, a sad clarity that this was the ending of a story I'd been trying to write for 58 years. A story where my mother finally loved me the way I needed to be loved. A story where sacrifice was rewarded with gratitude. A story where my loyalty was reciprocated. That story was over. And I was finally ready to accept that it had been over all along. Hospital Vicity. I drove to the hospital at 2:00 p.m. I wasn't doing this for my mother. I was doing this for myself. To see with my own eyes that I could be in a room with her, and not fall back into the old patterns. To see if I could be compassionate without being responsible. To see if I could let go of the need for her to understand what she'd done to me. Patricia was in the waiting room when I arrived. She stood up when she saw me, uncertainty written across her face. You came? She said. I came. I agreed. How is she? Sedated? Patricia said. They're going to do surgery tomorrow to repair the hip. After that, she'll need rehabilitation. She'll need someone to help her at home, at least for a while. I heard what she wasn't saying. She's going to need you. I'm not going to be that person, I said clearly. I know, Patricia said, and she didn't sound disappointed or angry. She sounded relieved. I wasn't asking. I just wanted you to know the situation. Who's going to help her? I asked. I'm going to, Patricia said. For a while, anyway. But Maggie, I also need you to know. I'm not going to sacrifice my life for her the way you did. I'm going to help because it's the right thing to do. But I'm also going to maintain my boundaries. I'm going to make sure my own needs are met. And if it gets to be too much, I'm going to say so. I felt something shift in my chest. This was growth. Real, concrete growth. My sister was learning the lessons that I'd had to learn the hard way. That sounds wise, I said. I learned from the best, Patricia said, and she smiled sadly. Mo and Team Mom, they let me see Dorothy for a few minutes before she went into surgery. She was asleep, her face smaller than I remembered it, older. The lines in her face told the story of a lifetime of taking things. From her husband, from her daughters, from anyone who got close enough to take from. But they also told the story of someone who'd been terrified the entire time that what she was taking wouldn't be enough. I stood at the foot of her bed, and I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt something like pity, but not the patronizing kind. The kind that comes from understanding that she'd been trapped by her own fears in a way that was just as limiting as the way my fear of losing her had trapped me. A nurse came in and saw me standing there. "Are you family?" she asked. "I'm her daughter," I said. "She's been asking for someone named Maggie," the nurse said. "Is that you?" My breath caught. "Yes," I said. "She was calling for you earlier," the nurse said, "before the medication took effect. She kept saying your name." I looked at my mother's sleeping face, and I felt something break open inside me. Not in a healing way. In a way that was both painful and necessary. She'd been calling for me. Even in her confusion, even with her failing memory, some part of her had remembered that she'd lost me. But I wasn't the one who needed to make this right. She was. And I was finally okay with the fact that she might never be able to do that. Teach Sarjar way and Aftr Maish, I didn't stay for the surgery. I didn't sit in the waiting room. I drove back to my house. Patricia called me that evening to tell me the surgery had gone well. My mother was in recovery. She was asking for me. "Tell her I sent my love," I said carefully. "You could tell her yourself," Patricia suggested gently. "I could," I agreed, "but I'm not going to." "Patricia, I need you to understand. I can acknowledge that she's my mother, and I can care about her well-being without being responsible for her emotional comfort. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. But if I go to her now, if I show up, she's going to think that means the old patterns are back. She's going to think that means I'm available to her again, and I'm not." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You're right," she said finally. I was hoping." "What were you hoping?" I asked. "I was hoping that maybe you two could find a way back to each other. Before it's too late." "There is no back," I said gently. "There's only forward. And forward for me looks like me prioritizing my own peace, and forward for her looks like her learning to live without the people who've been enabling her." I called Susan that night and told her everything. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Guilty," I said immediately, and then angry at myself for feeling guilty, and then sad about all of it. "That's the appropriate response," Susan said. "You're grieving again? Not your mother. You've already grieved her. You're grieving the role you played in her life. You're grieving the version of yourself that was always available, always responsible. You're saying goodbye to that Maggie? Is that healthy?" I asked. "It's necessary," Susan said. "Whether or not it's healthy is something only you can decide. But I think it is. I think honoring that version of yourself while also celebrating the version of yourself that said no. I think that's the healthiest thing you can do." My mother came home from the hospital 6 days later. Patricia set up a system where she visited twice a day. She hired a physical therapist to come to the house. She arranged meals and medication and all the logistics of recovery. And she maintained her boundaries. She called me one evening to tell me about it. "She asked me why you weren't coming to see her," Patricia said. "I told her the truth, that you needed space, that you needed to prioritize your own well-being, and that she needed to accept that." "How did she take it?" I asked. "She cried," Patricia said. "And then she asked if it was her fault. And I said yes. Yes, it was her fault. You spent 50 years sacrificing for this family, and when you finally stopped, she chose to sever contact rather than face what she'd done. That's on her." I felt tears running down my face. "She's accepting it now," Patricia continued. "I don't know if she understands it fully. Her memory is still going. But I think on some level, she's starting to understand that you're not coming back. That the dynamic has changed. That she has to figure out how to be her daughter without you being at her service." "How are you doing with all of this?" I asked. "Honestly," Patricia said, "I'm exhausted. But it's different than the exhaustion I used to feel. This exhaustion feels like I'm building something instead of serving someone. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," I said. Tage turfed Ram David 2 weeks after my mother came home from the hospital, I received another letter. This time from David. "Dear Maggie, I've been in therapy for almost 4 months now. I've been working on understanding why I acted the way I did at your party. Why I thought it was funny to humiliate you. Why I called you the name I called you. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that no one had ever told me no before. I'd been given everything I wanted. I'd been allowed to be cruel without consequences. I'd been enabled by everyone around me. But mostly, I think I did it because I was jealous of you. Not in the way I understand jealousy now, but in a deep, unconscious way. You seemed to have everything figured out. You seemed strong and capable, and like you didn't need anything from anyone, and I hated you for that. Because I needed everything from everyone. My therapist helped me understand that throwing your cake on the floor wasn't really about you. It was about me trying to knock you down so I didn't feel so small. I'm sorry. I know I apologized before, but this apology goes deeper. I'm not just sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry for the kind of person I was, and I'm working on being a different kind of person now. I got a full-time job. I'm paying my own bills. I'm seeing my therapist twice a week. I'm trying to be someone who doesn't need to knock others down in order to feel okay about myself. I'm not asking for a relationship. I'm just asking that you know I understand what I did, and I'm changing because I understand it. Not because I'm trying to get you back, but because it's the right thing to do. With respect. David, I read that letter, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel: hope. Not hope that we'd go back to some version of what we'd been before, but hope that maybe there was a future where David could be a decent human being, where he could understand the impact of his actions on others, where he could grow. I didn't write back, but I kept the letter. Sabbatical began 6 months after the cake incident. I left my job. I'd taken a sabbatical, 1 year unpaid, but available if I wanted to come back. I'd spent the previous 6 months training my replacement, mentoring my vice principal, and wrapping up projects. The day I left, my colleagues threw me a small party in the teacher's lounge. They gave me a gift card to a bookstore and a framed photo of me with my leadership team. People told me I looked lighter. Happier. Like I'd finally let go of something that had been weighing me down. Where are you going first? My vice principal asked. France, I said. I'm spending 3 weeks in Provence. Then I'm going to figure it out from there? You deserve it, she said. And I believed her. For the first time in my life, I actually believed that I deserved something, not because I'd earned it through sacrifice, but because I was worth it simply by being me. Before I left for France, I spent one final week in my house. I watered my garden, I packed my suitcase, I made sure my affairs were in order, and I wrote a letter to my mother, not to send. Just to write, Dear Mom, I'm leaving tomorrow for France. I don't know when I'll be back. I needed you to know that I'm going because I'm choosing myself. Because I've spent 58 years choosing you, and it's finally time to choose me. I don't expect you to understand this. I don't expect you to be happy for me. But I needed to tell you anyway. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not even sad, not really. I'm just at peace with the fact that you're not the mother I needed you to be, and I'm not the daughter you wanted me to be. And there's nothing either of us can do to change that. I'm going to live my life now. I'm going to travel. I'm going to read. I'm going to sit in cafes and drink wine and do absolutely nothing productive. I'm going to be selfish. And I'm going to be happy. I hope you find peace too, Mom. Not with me, but within yourself. Your daughter, Maggie. I didn't mail it. I burned it in my fireplace and watched the ashes rise up the chimney. Before, the night before I left for France, I sat in my garden one last time. The autumn had turned to winter, and most of my flowers had gone dormant. But there was something beautiful about the garden in this season. The bones of it were showing. The structure underneath all the flowering and growing and blooming. I thought about the structure of my life. What remained when you stripped away all the obligations, all the sacrifices, all the roles you'd been assigned? What remained was me, just me. Margaret Foster, 58 years old, finally meeting herself for the first time. I thought about my mother, probably in her house right now, struggling with her rehabilitation, confused by her failing memory. I thought about Patricia, learning to set boundaries with her. I thought about David, working in therapy to become better. I thought about how it had all started with a cake on a marble floor and a comment I'd refused to accept as final. And I thought about how the real revenge, the deep, lasting, soul-level revenge, wasn't about making anyone suffer. It was about refusing to let their treatment of me define my self-worth. It was about standing up and saying I deserve better, and then actually building that better life. It was about freedom. T departure, I drove to the airport at 5:00 a.m. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I had my passport, my luggage, my phone with my travel itinerary downloaded. I had 3 weeks planned in Provence and then complete openness after that. As I drove, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. The woman who'd hidden in a bathroom at a country club and made a decision. That woman was brave, but she didn't know yet what she was capable of. Now I knew. I was capable of saying no. Capable of standing alone. Capable of choosing myself. I was capable of living. At the airport, I checked in my luggage. I went through security. I found my gate. And I sat down in the waiting area with my boarding pass in my hand. A woman next to me smiled. She was maybe my age, with kind eyes and a good book. "Going somewhere nice?" she asked. "France," I said. "I'm taking a year to figure out who I am." "That sounds wonderful," she said. "I did something similar when I was your age. Best decision I ever made." "What did you find?" I asked. She thought about this for a moment. "I found myself," she said finally. "I found out that I was more capable than I thought. More resilient. More worthy of my own love than I'd ever given myself credit for. That's what I'm hoping to find," I said. "You will," she said. "I can tell. You have the look of someone who's finally letting herself matter." I boarded the plane an hour later. As we took off, I looked down at my city getting smaller and smaller below me. I thought about all the people I was leaving behind. My mother, my sister, my nephew, my Aunt Louise, Susan, James, Michael. And I realized that I wasn't leaving them. I was just repositioning myself. I was moving from a place where I was trying to hold everyone up to a place where I could let them hold themselves up. That was the real revolution. Not burning bridges, but finally letting go. The plane climbed higher and higher until the city disappeared entirely, and I sat back in my seat, closed my eyes, and allowed myself to simply exist. No obligations, no guilt, no need to be anything other than exactly what I was, a woman who had survived. A woman who had left. A woman who had finally chosen herself. The revenge was complete, and it looked exactly like freedom. Ritu R9 Hamid, the flight from Paris landed at 20:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. Exactly 1 year after I'd left, I'd changed planes twice, checked my luggage once, and spent the flight reading a novel I'd picked up in a cafe in Lyon. I was tanned from the Mediterranean sun. My hair was longer, streaked with highlights from weeks spent outdoors. I was wearing linen pants and a silk scarf, and I looked, for the first time in my adult life, like someone who was living instead of someone who was managing. As I walked through the terminal, I felt a strange sense of dislocation. This airport was familiar. I'd been through it 100 times before my sabbatical, but I was not the same person who'd last walked through it. The woman who'd left had been terrified. Brave, yes, but terrified. Terrified that she was making a mistake. Terrified that her family would suffer. Terrified that somewhere deep down, she was actually selfish and cruel. The woman who'd returned knew better. Those 12 months had changed everything. I'd spent 3 weeks in Provence eating bread and cheese and sitting in the sun. I'd moved to Barcelona for a month, where I'd taken a Spanish language class and made friends with a group of traveling women my age. I'd spent 6 weeks in Greece, island, hopping and swimming in the Mediterranean, and reading books I'd been meaning to read for years. I'd also spent time alone, real time. Not the loneliness of isolation, but the solitude of self-discovery. I'd rented a cottage in the countryside outside of Tuscany for a month, and I'd done nothing. Literally nothing. I'd read. I'd written in my journal. I'd walked through olive groves. I'd sat on my porch and thought about my life. And somewhere in that nothing, I'd found myself. I'd discovered that I loved art. That I could spend hours in a museum and lose myself in paintings. I'd discovered that I was a better travel companion than I'd expected. That I could navigate foreign cities and make new friends and be alone without being lonely. I'd discovered that I was funny. That I could make people laugh, not with self-deprecating humor or by being the one who managed everyone else's emotions, but with genuine wit and observation and presence. I discovered that I was strong. Not the strength of sacrifice, but the strength of someone who could stand on her own 2 feet and not need to lean on anyone else. Most importantly, I discovered that I liked myself. Throughout the year, I'd received messages from home. Patricia had sent photos of my mother's rehabilitation progress. My mother had eventually regained enough mobility to move around the house with a walker. She'd also regained some of her memory, though the doctors said the Alzheimer's was progressing. Patricia had managed all of it with grace and boundaries. She helped, But she didn't sacrifice. She visited, but she had her own life. She was present without losing herself. I'd received an email from David saying he'd gotten promoted at work. He was in a serious relationship. He was continuing therapy. He'd found a stability that came from knowing he could take care of himself. He'd ended the email with, "I hope someday we can rebuild something. Not what we had before, but something real. No pressure though. I just wanted you to know I'm doing okay." Aunt Louise had sent postcards from a cruise she'd taken. She was traveling. She was dating. She was living. She'd written on one of them, "Your mother asks about you sometimes, but mostly she's forgotten the fight. The doctors say that's a mercy. I tend to agree. I'm so proud of you for taking your life back." Michael had called me monthly. He was thriving in Tokyo. He'd met someone, a woman named Yuki. He was talking about marriage. He was grateful that his mother had finally figured out how to take care of herself. He'd said on one of our calls, "You know what the best gift you gave me was? You showed me that it was okay to prioritize my own life. That loving your family doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. That's revolutionary, Mom." And James, my ex-husband, had sent a simple message heard through the grapevine, "You're doing well. I'm happy for you. You always deserved this." But I hadn't been in constant contact. I hadn't checked in obsessively. I hadn't made myself available. I'd allowed distance and space and time to do what they do, provide perspective and healing. And I'd rented a car at the airport and driven to my house instead of having someone pick me up. The key still worked. The door opened with a familiar creak. And I stepped back into the place I'd left a year ago. Except it wasn't the same place anymore. Susan had agreed to come by once a week to water my plants, and she'd done an excellent job. My garden was overgrown, wild, more beautiful than I'd ever made it in all my years of meticulous care. The house itself was clean. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. But I had changed so much that the house felt different. Smaller somehow. Or maybe I'd just gotten bigger. I spent that first evening unpacking and reorganizing. I put my clothes away. I lined my bookshelves with the new books I'd collected from bookstores in different countries. I arranged my photographs, not the old ones of my family, but new ones. Me in Provence. Me in Barcelona. Me in Athens. Me alone smiling at peace. Patricia called me the next day. "You're back," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I'm back," I confirmed. "How are you?" "I'm good," I said. "Better than I've been in my entire life." "I want to see you," Patricia said. "Only if you want to see me. But I'd really like to see you." We met for coffee at the same cafe where we'd reconciled a year ago. Patricia looked different too. She was thinner, stronger. Her face had a clarity that hadn't been there before. She was no longer my sister who needed me. She was my sister who was building her own life. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. I told her about Provence and the bread, and the way the light hit the buildings at sunset. I told her about Barcelona and the language class, and the friends I'd made. I told her about the month in the Italian countryside where I'd done nothing but exist. And she told me about the past year. She'd continued therapy. She'd set permanent boundaries with our mother. She'd strengthened her relationship with David. She'd even started dating a man she'd met in her grief support group. Yes, she was in a grief support group, processing the loss of the family relationship we'd both had. "Mom's having a hard time?" Patricia said carefully. "The Alzheimer's is progressing. Most days she doesn't know where she is. Sometimes she doesn't recognize me." "How are you doing with that?" I asked. "Better than I would have a year ago," Patricia said. "I've grieved the mother I wish I had. Now I'm just trying to be present with the person she is. It's different, it's healthier." "Have you told her I'm back?" I asked. "No," Patricia said. "I wanted to ask you first. Do you want me to tell her?" I thought about this. About my mother somewhere in the fog of her failing mind. About whether she would even understand or remember that I'd been gone. "Tell her I said hello," I said finally. "But don't expect anything from her. And don't make it about me being back or her being sorry. Just tell her I'm well." Patricia nodded. "I can do that." During my second week back, I had to make a decision about my job. The school district had offered to bring me back. They'd offered a promotion. Actually, to assistant superintendent. It was a prestigious position, more money, more authority. I met with the superintendent and I told her the truth. I wasn't sure if I wanted to come back to education at all. "I spent 23 years running a school," I said. "I was good at it. But I was also spending a lot of my energy managing the emotional lives of people around me. And I've learned, over this past year, That I do that because I was taught to do that. I was taught that my worth came from how much I could take on, how much I could manage, how much I could sacrifice. And you don't believe that anymore? She asked. No, I said. I believe that my worth comes from my existence, and that I get to choose how to spend my time and energy. So you're saying no to the position? I'm saying I need to think about it, I said. I'm not saying no to work. I'm saying no to defining my life by work. I ended up taking a position as a consultant. I worked with schools on leadership development and culture. But it was part-time. It was flexible. It allowed me to work when I wanted to work and to live when I wanted to live. It was perfect. Tishi Lungtar fra Mum 2 months after I returned, I received a letter from my mother. It was very short. The handwriting was shaky, worse than it had been before I left. Dear Maggie, I don't remember much anymore. But Patricia says you're happy. I'm glad. You were always trying too hard to make everyone else happy. I'm glad you stopped. Love, Mom. I read that letter and I cried. Not because she'd finally understood, but because it didn't matter anymore whether she understood or not. I'd already let her go. I kept the letter, but I didn't respond. Some conversations had said everything they needed to say. Oniar Mark, exactly 1 year after I'd returned, I hosted a dinner party. I invited Susan, Aunt Louise, Patricia, and David. I also invited James and his new partner. I invited a few friends from my travels who were visiting the country. I invited Michael and his fiancée Yuki via video call. I cooked for 3 days. I made pasta from scratch. I roasted vegetables from my garden. I made a tiramisu that tasted like the one I'd eaten in Rome. I set my table with my good china, the china I'd been saving for some future occasion that never seemed to come. The occasion was this, the life I'd chosen. During dinner, as we were all talking and laughing and enjoying the food, Patricia raised her glass. I want to say something, she said, and the table went quiet. A year ago, my sister made a choice. A choice that looked like rejection to me at first, but it was actually a choice to protect herself. And by protecting herself, she taught the rest of us how to protect ourselves. She looked at me. I want to thank you for that, Maggie. For showing me that it's okay to say no. That it's okay to prioritize your own well-being. That love doesn't mean sacrifice. That you can care about people without destroying yourself for them. She raised her glass. To Maggie. To freedom. To choosing yourself. Everyone raised their glasses. I felt tears in my eyes. But they weren't sad tears. They were the tears that come when you realize that you've not only survived something, but you've actually transformed it. You've taken the pain and the betrayal and the humiliation, and you've turned it into something beautiful. You've turned it into freedom. After dinner, David pulled me aside. Thank you for letting me be here, he said. Thank you for changing, I replied. I don't know if I've changed enough, he said, but I'm trying, and I think that's what you taught me, that trying matters. That growth matters, that acknowledging your mistakes matters. It does, I said. Keep going. Et Guardian at seed. Later that night, after everyone had left, I stood in my garden. The autumn leaves were turning again. It was almost 1 year after I'd looked at this same garden and decided to let go. The plants I'd tended so carefully had grown wild and untended for a year. Some had died. Some had thrived despite my absence. Some had transformed into something more beautiful than they'd been when I was carefully controlling everything. It was a perfect metaphor for my life. I thought about the woman I'd been when I was throwing my energy into keeping everything alive exactly as I wanted it. I thought about the moment I'd stopped. I thought about the year I'd spent letting go. And I thought about who I was now. I was a woman who could say no without guilt. A woman who could love people without sacrificing herself. A woman who could walk away and not look back. A woman who could also, sometimes, look back with compassion and curiosity instead of anger and resentment. I was a woman who was finally, truly at peace. Final TRH, here's what I want you to know if you're listening to this story and you're wondering if you should do what I did. The revenge I took wasn't cruel. It wasn't violent. It wasn't about making my family suffer or proving that I was right and they were wrong. The revenge I took was quiet and simple, and absolutely devastating to people who counted on my compliance. I stopped showing up. I stopped being available. I stopped sacrificing. I stopped making myself small so that others could feel big. I stopped being the one who held the family together through sheer force of will and financial support. I simply stopped. And in stopping, I gave them 2 choices. They could change, or they could lose me. Some of them chose to change. Patricia, David, Aunt Louise, they all looked at themselves and decided to be different, to be better. It took time, it took therapy, it took sitting with uncomfortable truths about themselves. But they did it. My mother couldn't make that choice. Her mind was already leaving her by the time I set my boundary. But she accepted it, in her way, and I've come to terms with the fact that some people simply cannot be the people we need them to be. My sister and nephew and aunt, they found a way forward. And I found a way to be in relationship with them without being consumed by them. This is the real revenge, not destruction, not punishment, but the simple, powerful act of taking back your own life. Thclasiji, I'm standing in my study now, 1 year after I returned from my sabbatical, looking at the photograph on my mantle. I've added new photos. Me in front of the Eiffel Tower, me sitting in a cafe in Barcelona, me on a beach in Greece, me smiling at peace. But I've kept the old photo of my mother. Not because I've forgiven her for everything, but because I've accepted her. Because I understand now that she was doing the best she could with the understanding she had. Because holding on to anger was just another way of being tied to her. The real freedom came when I let that anger go. I don't know what the future holds. My mother may get worse before she gets better, or she may simply drift further into the fog. My sister and I will continue to navigate our new relationship carefully, with boundaries. My nephew will continue to grow. My aunt will continue to travel and live. And I will continue to live a life that is mine, not defined by what others need from me, but by what I choose to give to myself and to the world. This is the victory. This is the revenge. This is the only answer that matters, freedom, and it was worth every moment of pain to get here. Reflectio for Telestiner. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Where are you in this story? Are you the Maggie sacrificing everything and wondering when it will finally be enough? Are you the Patricia, looking back at your choices and wanting to do better? Are you the David, realizing that your actions have consequences and wondering if you can change? Wherever you are, I want you to know this: it's never too late to change the story. It's never too late to set a boundary. It's never too late to choose yourself. The people who love you, really love you, will understand, and the people who can't understand, well, sometimes that's the cost of freedom, and sometimes that cost is worth it. Thank you for listening to Maggie's story. Thank you for sitting with her pain and her courage and her journey. If this story has touched you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because there are a lot of Maggies out there, a lot of people who've been told their whole lives that their worth comes from what they can do for others. And it's time that changed. I'm sending you love and strength and the courage to choose yourself. This is the end of the story, but it's the beginning of yours.